Well, welcome everybody. I mean, we didn't expect a massive turnout, if we're honest, because this is our first meeting since the general election, so are a bit out of step with things. But this is the beginning of what's going to be a much more active year, I think, in terms of the speakers that we've got lined up and some of the events we are planning for next year for working with councillors up in North Wales and the Women's Committee Day that we're pretty well much organised on that now, aren't we? It's just getting the final detail done, which is more than we've done for some time. So that's really great, and I'm really hopeful with the councillor one that we can help get them to feed into what would like from the co-op, and this is aimed at Labour councillors who have the co-op tag after their name, and also get an understanding of what we're working on as well in the policies we've got. So that it will be in Flint Town Hall, thanks to Michelle. So that's pretty good. Without further ado, I'd like to open the meeting and ask our colleagues from Nesta to lead in the discussion. And I know that we're hoping that we'll have some outcomes about the best sort of policy or what kind of things we can do to help get somewhere with the whole issue. Is that you, Patricia? Are you speaking?
I'll start off.
Oh,
Thanks.
sorry,
Thanks
Jonathan.
a lot, Donna.
Sorry,
That's
I
okay.
wasn't sure.
No,
Okay, thank
that's good.
you.
Thanks, Donna. And thanks for the invite to come and to speak to you today. So my name's Jonathan Bone. I'm mission manager in Nesta's Healthy Life team. I'm responsible for leading our work around tackling obesity in Wales. And David emailed me a few weeks ago to ask if we could come and speak to you today about the changes that would be required to tackle obesity. And it came at a really good time because we're due to be publishing a piece of work called Our Blueprint for Tackling Obesity in just a few weeks' time. That piece of work is aiming to provide an interactive tool for policymakers to better understand the relative cost and impact of a wide variety of potential policies which do aim to tackle obesity. So it's really looking to support more evidence-based policy decisions. And as far as we know, it is the most robust piece of work of its type. And it's been the result of 2 years at least of hard work from the Nesta team, as well as lots of external experts. So really proud to give you a bit of a sneak preview of this today. I'm joined by my colleague Trish as well here, who's going to be giving you a much more in-depth view of the blueprint itself. But before I hand over to Trish, I'm going to tell you a bit more about Nesta and the issue we face around obesity itself in Wales. Trish, could you share your slides, please?
Yes, I can. Just bear with
Thank you.
me. Oh, the sharing function, it needs to be turned on. Let me try again. Is somebody okay? I've got permissions now. See it?
Yeah, that's looking great. Thanks, Trish. Could you just go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
So, first of all, who is Nesta? For those of you who don't know who Nesta are, we're an innovation agency. We initially were set up by the UK government back in 1998, but then we span out to become an independent charity back in 2012. And really, I think over the last 20 years, we have had quite a similar broad goal, really, of working with other organisations to design, test, and scale innovative solutions to societal problems. We're made up of about 300 people, and we're split between offices in Cardiff, London, and Edinburgh. If you just go to the next slide, please, Trish. And so one of the three societal issues that we focus on is on increasing the average number of healthy years lived in the UK. And we're aiming to achieve this by working with other organisations to halve the prevalence of obesity. So across our missions, we really work it, I guess, in three ways, really. Firstly, by conducting experiments and trials with partners to improve our food environment. So just a quick example of that, we're working with Asda at the moment, Starbucks, and a community supermarket called Community Shop. And we're working with them to design and run trials in retail settings. We also support early stage ventures, making investments, but also creating new ventures in-house ourselves and spinning those out. So an example of that is a healthier vending machine startup called Marty's, which we're currently in the process of spinning out. And third, and I think probably where this project we're going to talk to you about today really sits, is in influencing wider systems of policy, practice, and funding. So through kind of lots of evidence creation and advocacy work, policy design, that type of thing. Over to the next slide, please, Trish. So I'm sure you're all aware that obesity is a huge issue in Wales and the UK more generally. And as Donna was saying, it was on the news quite a lot today as well. But really to highlight that, so across the UK, nearly 30% of adults are living with obesity. And our own analysis of the National Survey for Wales data, which corrected for some bias in how these figures are normally reported, suggested that obesity rates in Wales are likely to be actually higher in Wales than other parts of the UK, with more than a third of Welsh adults living with obesity. So just over to the next slide, please, Trish. And that's, of course, a huge problem because, as you'll all be aware, obesity increases the risk of lots of serious health conditions, including type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, alongside certain types of cancer as well. So not only does that unnecessarily cut many people's lives shorter, unnecessarily, it also has large economic costs. So this analysis, which we're showing on this slide, is from Frontier Economics. And it's estimated that overweight and obesity costs the UK economy £98 billion a year. And that includes huge costs to the NHS, as well as through productivity loss. So over to the next slide, please. So I know I mentioned the goal that we had of halving the obesity rates by 2030, sorry. And I always like to highlight that we're aware that that's a really, really ambitious goal, that is ambitious by design. We really think, it's not going to be at all easy, but it is at least possible with the right sort of policies, focused innovation, and political will. Just to highlight that, to achieve the goal of halving obesity, it would mean shifting the weight distribution of the UK to be similar to that of the early 90s, which I presume is in most people's lifetimes here. And we calculated that would require quite a small reduction in daily energy intake among people living with excess weight. So we estimated that would be require around 216 calories daily reduction, which is about the same as a small bottle of Coke. So I guess, but really by setting that ambitious target, we're really just trying to focus our resources on those things that are really going to make the most difference and at a large scale, and encourage others to do the same. And I think getting to grips of what those big things are that we can do and have the most impact with is really a huge motivation for this blueprint project that we're talking to you about today. But as I said, Trish is much more of an expert on this particular project, so I'm just going to hand over to her to tell you a bit more about that.
Great, thank you very much, Jono. Hi everyone. My name is Trish, and I'm based in the London office, and I've been working on this blueprint project for quite not quite the 2 years, but for quite a while now. So I think Jono has shown you that there's really a clear case for action on obesity in the UK. But one of the big challenges that we face is that there's really no shortage of ideas on how we solve the problem of obesity. As sort of an outset of this work, when we reviewed reports that have been published over the last 5 years, so for example, the National Food Strategy and the Turning the Tide report, we identified over 100 policy recommendations for reducing obesity. So if you're a policymaker and there are like 100 high priority ideas, then none of them end up being a priority. So the risk you have there is that the policies that are implemented on quite a piecemeal basis, that there is a focus on low intervention policies that place a really high responsibility on the individual, and ultimately you end up with a relatively low impact. So we were very keen to fill this gap in our knowledge by developing a toolkit that would allow policymakers to compare the relative cost, impact, and the benefits of the various policy options and hopefully lead us towards more evidence-based decision-making amongst policymakers. So the toolkit is what we are calling the blueprint for halving obesity. And as John, I think, mentioned earlier on, this has been a 2-year collaboration that we've done with leading academics. And you'll see on the slide here some of the institutions that we have been working with, health economists and also policymakers across the UK. And we're really excited that we're just almost ready to launch it. We're really confident that it's the most robust and comprehensive evidence-based toolkit for reducing obesity prevalence specifically to the UK. I think the closest report that, in similarity, I suppose, was the McKinsey report, which was published about 10 years ago. But Blueprint is really, it's a step change from that McKinsey report. It's important to note that the blueprint looks only at obesity. So there may be some policies that might have an impact on like food sustainability or intake of fruit and vegetables or other things, but that's not to say that those things are not important, but it's not within the focus of this particular toolkit. And the focus is about reducing calorie consumption at a population level. So kind of referring back to what Jono showed us in that slide about the bottle of Coke, that it's looking at changes at a population level. And finally, when we talk about calorie content of food, we, in this study, use the UK government's metric for defining a food product as being HFSS, so high in fat, sugar and salt. So that's the metric we're working alongside. So in a short while, I'll take you on a bit of a tour of the website tool. But I first wanted to just talk you through a little bit about how we did this work. So we started with a review of existing reports and recommendations to scope out all the possible policy recommendations for obesity. And we reduced that down to approximately 30 policies. We sort of fixed on the 30 number because we were really keen that we would balance out sort of the comprehensiveness of the tool and the usability. Also, I think, when we talked earlier about the kind of hundreds of policies, there's a lot of overlap in some of those kind of policy ideas. So we were able to sort of consolidate them a lot in how we present them. We then proceeded to do some rapid scientific evidence reviews to identify an effect size for each of these policies. So like the effect size really is a figure that demonstrates the impact that that particular policy or intervention would have on obesity. And we then had to sort of scale that up to what would that look like if you implemented this across the population. And we used a really gold standard method for modeling population level obesity impact in that stage of the work. We then took these rapid reviews and the analytical models to our expert advisory group for their input, and they reviewed all our numbers and all of our analysis to give us sign off and give us that extra level of rigor. We also then wanted to look at what these policies are all going to cost. So we commissioned some external economic modelling with a consultancy called Health Lumen, and they were able to estimate the cost of each policy. And we used analysis by Frontier Economics and the Tony Blair Institute, which John has already referred to estimate the benefits of this policy over 5 years, and the benefits to government in terms of money, basically. Finally, we took all of these findings to a wider group of experts. So beyond those 15-member high-level advisory group, we contacted about 100 people, experts, academic experts, policy experts, to get their feedback. About 40 of them came back to us, and all of them kind of broadly agreed with our policy rankings. So this is really just to tell you about the results of what we present in the blueprint each policy against. We presented against 4 different metrics. The first of those is impact. So by how much would this policy reduce the prevalence of obesity in the UK? So like by what percentage relative reduction are you likely to see? The second is evidence strength. We deliberately included evidence strength because impact and evidence often get confused, or not confused, rather conflated, so sometimes it's difficult to unpick them. So we know that there's a lot of policies where we've got really good evidence of low impact, because these are the type of policies that are really quite easily tested using randomized controlled trials. But equally, on the other side, there are some policies that we can model the potential impact of, and that impact is pretty huge. But because those are the kind of policies that are difficult to test in a randomized controlled trial, you would assess the strength of evidence as low. And so we might be less confident on just how impactful they might be if you were to implement them in the real world. We also have a cost to government as a front and center metric in the tool. We've got a cost to industry in there as well, which is more down in the detail, and it's not a front and center metric sort of on the landing page. And this will all make a little bit more sense when I show you the tool. And finally, we also wanted to measure or estimate the benefit to government of the policy. Again, this isn't front and center on the tool, but it's in the detail of each of the policies that we present in the tool. And for those who are interested in this detail, we actually calculate the benefits using Frontier and the TBI analysis. So it's directly proportional to the impact, but we think it's helpful to present this in cost terms as well as in the percentage reduction in obesity prevalence. So I'm going to now, and we could take questions at the end, walk you through the site. So just bear with me. Let's hope my technology doesn't fail as we click through. Can everybody see that? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is the landing page of the Blueprint tool. So I'm just, there are themes that they're arranged by, but I'm just going to unclick advertising so we can see everything. So this is the landing page. Remember I was talking about like metrics being front and center in the tool. This is what I'm talking about here. So the impact on obesity, the evidence quality, and the cost to government. So these toggles here, so you can select policies based on their impact or their evidence quality or cost to government. So say, for example, you're thinking, I want really moderately costly policies. And I don't know if you noticed that it immediately kind of screens out the higher cost policies. And say, for example, we want to get rid of any of the very low evidence quality policies, you can toggle the screen like that. And then you've got a list here, okay, of all the policies that fit into that category. So you can see here, we've got the title of the policy, a little bit of a short description. These are some of the themes that are associated with that policy. And then we can see the impact, the evidence quality, and the cost to government. Now, these numbers in these figures in these circles here, when you delve down into the actual policy, you'll get proper numbers for those. And I'm going to click through on the healthiness targets for retailers policy and just let you see what it looks like once you start digging deeper into the tool. So you've got like the policy title up here, and then a summary here that tells you the impact on obesity being very high. This one is telling you it's got a 25% reduction in obesity prevalence from this policy. So this is really one of our really, really high impact policies. We find here that the evidence quality for this is moderate, and it comes at a very close, low cost to government. So going a little bit further down, we can see there are these categories here: the recent context, the case studies, population impact, cost and benefits, impact on equalities, and evidence. So we have this kind of information and background on every single one of the policies. So essentially, this is kind of replicated across the tool. There are also some policy packages, which I'll talk to you about when in a moment. And for those who really want to dig deep down into the method and try and understand the robustness and why this evidence is really robust, you can go and take a look at all of our reports, technical reports, and understand how we did what we did. So I'm just going to go back to our presentation and talk a little bit more about policy packages. So we didn't want to just present people with a list of policies. We thought it would be really beneficial to present packages of complementary policies, because ideally none of these policies, if we're going to really hit our targets of reducing obesity by a substantial amount, it's going to take more than one policy to do that. So we wanted to show how these different policies could be combined to meet the ambition of halving the prevalence of obesity. We also wanted to demonstrate that there are a number of different ways that you could do this. And this is I think it's the real benefit of the tool. We're not prescribing how you do it. It's really up to the decision makers and the policy makers themselves. So this quadrant here represents 4 different policy packages that a government could implement. We've mapped them out, impact against cost. So if you see on the horizontal axis is the cost to government, and on the vertical axis, the percentage impact on obesity reduction. So there's a way that, for example, a government could reach the ambition with treatment alone, but it would be prohibitively expensive. And that's obviously a very timely consideration, bearing in mind the news today. There's also a way it could be done through taxes and regulation, which Nesta would be 100% behind, but it might require a lot of political capital that the government might not have. We've also put together a package that we've already presented to UK government that we think provides a good combination of impact, cost, and political palatability that could achieve a 50% reduction in a single term of government. So the package we presented to the UK government has a mix of targets for retailers to set targets for them to sell a healthier portfolio of products, as well as treating those who are at the greatest need with targeted drugs. We also, in this package, includes an advertising ban, which the government is already committed to doing by this time next year, though outdoor advertising won't be included in that. And this policy will impact Wales as well. So this package of 7 policies we recommend, or we have recommended, or suggested rather, is high impact, low cost, and it's a pretty equitable approach to halving obesity. Some of the policies in here are devolved, such as banning the price promotions for unhealthy foods for out of home, so in restaurants and takeaways. So they can be implemented in Wales without doing so in other parts of the UK. Or if the UK government implemented them, Welsh government could choose to follow similar actions. Some policies, like the mandating data collection one, would require intergovernmental agreement for it to happen, whilst others, like the restrictions on TV and online advertising, are in reserved areas. So this would be applicable in Wales if the UK government decided to implement them. I would say, though, that across all these policies, regardless of devolution status, we'd be encouraging as much cross-nation working as possible, because I think the more consistency there is across the UK, then the easier it will be for industry and consumers. But we've also put together a fully devolved recommended package, which Jono will talk you through later on in this presentation. So you'll see overall on the side here, the impact of a 50% decrease in obesity. The collective evidence for these policies is strong. And you'll see here the cost to government at 2.6 billion over 5 years, but 32 billion per year in benefits, which is a pretty positive package, I would say. What about treatment? I think we would be pretty clear to UK and devolved governments that we can't treat our way out of the problem. If the government were to decide, for instance, to make the most effective weight loss drugs, which are currently approved by NICE to an extra 3 million people per year, which would, over the course of 5 years, amount to treating everybody living with obesity. You wouldn't even get to halving obesity here. The impact you see is a sort of round about 40%. And this will cost the government, by our modelling figures, 45 billion over 5 years. So that's a really phenomenal amount of money. And one thing also worth thinking about, this is modelled over 5 years, okay? And the evidence is that when people stop taking the drugs after 2 years, and that's the treatment is for 2 years, then they begin, quite a bit of the weight is regained. So whilst it's highly effective, these treatments for those living with obesity, it won't address obesity in children, nor will it address the need for preventative action alongside treatment. The other alternative is where governments could pursue a more regulatory and higher cost measures. And this would require a degree of political capital, which they might be willing to expend. This package includes a broad tax on sugar, which is a policy which was proposed in the National Food Strategy. And we'd be fully behind if the government said they were keen for extending taxes on sugar in discretionary food items. We estimate that the package would be slightly more expensive for government, but still not too bad when you compare with, like, for example, the treatment options. So one thing I guess we need to remind ourselves is that the obesity levels have doubled since the early 90s. So we're going to have a new approach if we want to achieve a serious reduction. This package here really sets out policies which in our assessment shows they'll have little to no impact on obesity levels, although they might be positive actions to take for other health outcomes or other social outcomes. For example, free school meals, for instance, but they won't achieve the change that we need to see to tackle obesity. And there are numbers of policies that get talked about a lot, but actually they don't achieve the impact that we need to see. So I'm going to hand back to Jono now, because Jono is going to talk about the Wales specific context in terms of policy packages.
Great, thanks a lot, Trish.
Shall I?
Yeah, if you just go over to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple more slides from us before we open up to questions and discussions. But yeah, we've put together a separate package of devolved policies based on this modelling work as well. So the size of the boxes here show the estimated impact of different policies that we'd be recommending. And firstly, the biggest impact we'd estimate to come from banning promotions on products that are high in fat, sugar and salt in large retail stores. So I think just to be really clear here, we're talking about introductory price offers and kind of temporary price reductions here. So things like was £2, now £1 type offers, rather than volume discounts like buy one, get one frees. And our modelling suggested that this would lead to a 29% relative reduction in obesity rates in Wales. And I think something that's really important to highlight here is that while restrictions on volume promotion, so your buy one, get one frees, are part of the legislation currently being developed by Welsh Government, this type of price promotion is not. So moving on to the second largest impact, we'd expect to be coming from restricting placement of unhealthy foods in retail settings. So that's banning unhealthy foods at checkouts and end of aisles. So, you'll often see chocolate bars at the checkout, for example, which I, for one, are often quite tempted by. And that policy is part of the current legislation being developed by Welsh Government. So really great to see, the relatively high impact that we can expect to see from that. The modelling suggested that will result in a 16% relative reduction in obesity rates. And then moving on to the other policies we'd be recommending for Welsh Government in our devolved package, we're looking at banning price promotions for unhealthy foods in the out-of-home sector. So that's restaurants, cafes and pubs, extending access to pharmacological treatments by providing an extra 25 million ring-fenced funding. So again, we're talking about those GLP-1 agonists like semaglutide that we were discussing earlier here, which have obviously been getting lots of attention even today, but also over the last few years. And also looking at ending all volume offers for unhealthy products in the retail sector, which, as I mentioned earlier, again, is something that's currently being developed in the legislation by Welsh Government. And those three final policies we'd estimate to have a relative reduction in obesity rates of between 1% and 2% each, which I think, although sounds relatively small, is still on the kind of higher end of lots of things we looked at, and when combined with other interventions could really contribute to a meaningful reduction in obesity rates. Just over to the next slide, please, Trish. So this final slide is just showing once again those policies I've just talked through, but with their expected costs and benefits to Wales. So under the assumption that these policies are additive in their impact, we'd expect that to cost Wales approximately 125 million to deliver over 5 years, with a benefit equating to 1.37 billion pounds. Over to the next slide. I think that's the end of the slides, though, that we wanted to go through with you today. So yeah, really keen to hear any initial thoughts or questions you have. As I said, we're publishing this, making this all publicly available in a few weeks' time, and I'll be sure to share a link to the website with you as soon as we do. So really would encourage you to play with the tool when it's available, and good to hear any questions and thoughts you have now, but also be great to hear any thoughts or questions when you've actually had a chance to play with the tool via email as well.